Welcome to Marketing Rebels Breaking Business Barriers. You have joined us for a special series called Marketing Momentum for Mental Health. And we have Brenda here today. She's going to tell us a little bit about herself, why this topic matters to her, and why it should matter to you. Welcome to the show, Brenda.
Oh, hi, Shauna. Thank you so very much for having me on this really important show. I believe it's important. Just to tell you a little bit about me, I am an entrepreneur and I work with other faith led, spirit led women entrepreneurs and coaches and speakers and teachers who want, of course, build a business, but they also want to have a prosperous and abundant and a happy life. So I work with them. I'm also a pastor. And have been for almost a couple of decades now. And I've been a teacher and an instructor and have run nonprofits. And so I have a whole bunch of hats that I wear. I am a mom of 3 adult daughters and I've got 2 granddaughters. And so, I've just lived a very full and a very happy life.
And so with that experience, you will have been exposed to a number of different, both good and difficult things. I mean, things I know is a broad term, but this has helped you to kind of navigate the ups and downs of life. And then also, of course, support other people as they do so as well. I know that your role as not only a communications expert and coach, you've been able to help people within their business to grow and thrive through these difficulties, but also as a pastor, I imagine the types of conversations you have can be very challenging at times.
They are conversations at some of the deepest levels in sharing with another human being. It's really sometimes really hard to have those conversations where we're digging not just into mental health, but emotional well-being, relationship well-being, just learning how to live and thrive in this world that we live in. So yeah, I've had some really interesting conversations and have lived a lot of life and have dealt with not only other people's mental health, my own mental health. Some there, and for me, there are levels of mental health. Right. There are what I like to call most people are at some point or another having emotional disturbances. And I think you can kind of relate to that. We all have periods of just emotional disturbance in our life. Things aren't going the way we necessarily want them to go. Something's fallen apart. Someone's left us. We have felt abandoned. We feel unsure of ourselves, or we feel unworthy for whatever reasons. And so we go through these periods of emotional disturbance. And I like to approach it like that because every behavior is not one of a mental illness, right? There's clinical mental illness, but then there's like what I like to coin as emotional disturbances as well.
Right. So it's circumstantial things that happen,
Yeah,
and you respond as a human. You're a
absolutely.
human in the end, and you will experience burnout. You will experience, emotional dysregulation where you are really sad or
Yeah.
really anxious or scared. All of these things are very valid experiences, but they don't, like you say, they aren't necessarily something that's going to be long-term chronic experiences. So how would you typically approach that? Like if you're talking as both a personal entrepreneur or as a pastor who's helping somebody through a difficult time in their life?
Some of the things that I see most lately, I'd say in the last 5 to 10 years, is the rise of anxiety and compulsive disorders, obsession. And I'm looking at it a lot in young people. I don't see that as much in, baby boomers or those generations following baby boomers, but I see it a lot in millennials and in some of these younger gens, right? There's a lot of anxiety, and I think about it a lot because I have to talk to these people, and I want to bring them some reassurance that you're okay. But when I look at it, what I see is one of the biggest factors that cause this level of anxiety that we see in young people is social media,
Mhm.
comparing themselves and their lives to what they see in social media, and then feeling that they don't measure up,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And so it brings a level of anxiety to their lives where, they're anxious about everything. They're anxious about their looks. They're anxious about whether they're, too fat, too thin, too tall, I see it, even in African American communities where there's a level of, oh, I'm too dark. I,
Mm.
I'm too, my hair is not the right kind of hair. All of these levels of anxiety that I didn't see growing up as a kid. We had normal stuff. We had puberty, we had adolescence, we had teenage years, and all the stuff that goes with that. But this is different. And I
Mhm.
think that, at least here in America and probably other places as well, there's a crisis of mental health issues. There's anxiety levels that are off the chain. People,
Right.
they're off the chain. And I listen and have conversations with people that they say to me, young people, that I just don't want to be here anymore. It's too hard. It's too, I'm not enough.
Yeah.
And that absolutely breaks my heart because here's what I know, and here's how my faith informs these emotional disturbances and mental health issues is that we're all created in the image of God. And like I like to tell them, God didn't make junk. You
Mhm.
are more than enough, but you have to believe that. And so sometimes it's a matter of taking people on a journey, going back, digging a little bit in their life. What are some of the things that made you feel competent? What did you love to do when you were a little kid? What did people tell you you were great at as a little kid, right? And some people, nobody told them anything. And so I said, well, let me step into that spot for you. And let me tell you that you are great at this and you're great at that, and you're a wonderful listener, and you give the best hugs ever, and you're kind, and you have to just kind of step into places where people have these gaps and these holes. And that's kind of what I believe that my purpose is, as a whether I express it as a coach, whether I express it as a pastor, whether I express it in the pulpit, is that I bring a level of cheerleading to your life. I bring a level of assurance to your life, and really try to connect you to this higher power that reminds you that you're the apple of God's eye. God created you in his image because he loves you, and all of the created parts of God, where in the beginning he created the heavens and the earth. It took 7 days for creation to make all the parts and pieces of this world that we live in, and he spoke them into existence out of nothing. And scripture tells us that he knew you even before you were in your mother's womb. And he had a plan for your life to prosper you and not to harm you, to give you a hope in a future. God doesn't make junk. The world may create junk. And so we want to change your perspective a little bit. You're not the junk.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting, actually. I just want to note, I'm going to go backwards. So, change your perspective is a really important thing to kind of entertain. And I know that it's easier said than done. I
Sure.
realize that, especially when you're having to do it for yourself.
Yeah.
But I think that's a really great first step, is to start acknowledging the different areas within which you have succeeded and start
Mhm.
focusing on that. And this is a huge mindset shift. You talk about people saying, be grateful, list your gratitudes. That's exactly this.
It
It-
is.
it's
It
it's
is.
this. And if you can't do it for yourself, having somebody else be there, like that was just like, here's Brenda, you said, stepping into these gaps, into these spaces that exist, that really shouldn't have existed in the first place. And you're filling them with love. You're filling them with empowerment. You're being that cheerleader. Because somewhere along the lines, they lost that part of themselves. And as you noted, and this is why I'm saying I'm working backwards, as you noted, the idea of, I know you said social media, but I'm going to go so far as to just say the internet.
Yeah.
It provides us with information, and that's great. The problem lies in the fact that we are not computers, and we do get information overload. You get overwhelmed, oversaturated with information, which can cloud our vision of the now, of the reality that exists for us in our unique circumstances. And then we get to that point where, like you said, we play that comparison game. So when you're filling those spaces with love from the outside, you're helping people to have a stronger foundation upon which to stand without having to worry about the Joneses, right? Or the Smiths, those proverbial families who seem to have it all together. And you start to ground yourself in the knowledge that that's not reality. So you need that space.
Yeah.
How can you, I'm putting myself into the mindset of somebody who already, you broke my heart when you said it, who already feels like they don't belong. How can we find that space? How can we get there?
Well, I have so many stories, but I want to tell you one story about a man named Mr. Robert. And Mr. Robert, I believe, was in his 50s, 60s, and I don't even know how he found me. Yes, I do. I remember now. Robert was in the homeless shelter here in our town. And I used to be the director for the women's shelter here in town. That was a result of women wound up there because of domestic violence and things like that. And Mr. Robert happened to be in the homeless shelter, and sometimes we did work together with the homeless shelter and the women's shelter. And I met Mr. Robert because the director of the homeless shelter was a member of my congregation, and so she brings Mr. Robert to church one Sunday. Mr. Robert obviously had mental illness. He talked to himself. He talked so fast you couldn't even understand what he was saying. It was nonsensical. He would sit down, he'd get up. He'd sit down, he'd get up. He'd walk around. I mean, he was a very peculiar type person. But here's where I feel, and this is why faith is so important when you're dealing with mental illness. Because of the love of God, right? That God loved us so much that he gave everything, his only begotten son. And so we receive all this love. Because this is my worldview, if God can love me enough in all of my imperfection, and the rest of the world in all of their imperfection, surely I can love one person in their imperfection, right? So Mr. Robert kept coming. Mr. Robert he had so much illness, and we didn't even realize at the time how clinically ill he was. But he was a veteran. He had served in the Vietnam War, and he came back and he was a damaged human being. And unfortunately, veterans services or whatever, they would give him medication, but there wasn't enough support in a community for Mr. Robert to get well. And so then it became a matter of, is Mr. Robert taking his medication? Can Mr. Robert even find the medication? Has he eaten? What is he eating? And so we became Mr. Robert's surrogate family. And we took care of Mr. Robert to the point where even in all of he would do things even in his home, like put, his shoes in the freezer.
Well,
There's
a whole new meaning to cold feet, but
cool feet, right? And so Robert had some habits. But what I do remember is I gave Robert a job. I said, Robert, when people come into the parking lot, I'd love for you to make sure that when they come into the doors, you greet them and you say hello. Can you do that? He was so excited to do that. And Robert did that job better than anyone I had ever seen. And he would greet them. And of course, at first they were a little put off, but then when they saw the love that was emanating out of Robert, they were able to give it back to him. And so love covers a multitude of emotional disturbances, mental illnesses. If those of us that are feeling more grounded and more stable at any given time in our life, if you're in a grounded place, then you have something that you can give to somebody who's not quite as grounded as you are right now, right? And they're feeling unloved, or they're feeling, out of control, or they're feeling hopeless, or they're feeling helpless. Give them a job. Give them a focus other than themselves. Help them. Let's go down to the homeless shelter and let's work the soup line today. Or you want to come with me? I've got a bunch of toys I want to deliver to these kids that I know. Let's give them something to do that focuses on helping somebody else, which can really, it's almost like a rubber band, and it can kind of snap people out of their own emotional disturbance, whatever that is.
Right.
I've had those times, and had it not been for the fact that there were people that I knew were counting on me, depending on me, needed me, I would have just stayed in bed with the cover pulled up over my head.
Yeah.
I couldn't. I didn't have the luxury of doing that, right?
Now I'm going to flip the script a little bit on you. I'm going to play devil's advocate because I just, full disclaimer, I agree with what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
I am that person. I do a lot better for myself when I can channel that negative energy into a positive outlet.
Mm-hmm.
And I have experienced, and I know so many people here listening have experienced that sensation that you've done that for so long.
Mm-hmm.
You've put other people first for so long that is actually the source of your dysregulation.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, you're the one in need, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're the one who needs somebody to do that to you.
Yeah.
So this just stresses the importance and the cyclical nature of helping the people who need help.
Yeah.
And that, I guess, in a nutshell, I mean, no matter where you're looking, for you, it was congregation. For some people, it might look different, but that's your community.
Absolutely. So we were created to be in families, period.
Mm-hmm.
We were created to be in community. So we have our natural families that we're born into. We have the cities and the places that we live that are a part of our communities. We have the family of God that we're a part of that particular community. We are created as human beings, not to live in solitude. Now, that being said, there's a place where personal solitude is okay. Like I'm a, what do you call, an introvert extrovert. I'm an extrovert and I love people and I love being with people when I need to, but there comes a moment in time like, okay, I've had enough and I need to go and be by myself, and I need some quiet time, and I need some me time. I need to be able to sleep if I need to sleep, or I need to be able to read a book if I need to read a book. There are times when my phone goes on, I turn it off. I just turn the phone off. And I've had to learn to do that, because we can't. So while we're in community, part of being in community is getting what you need. And
Right.
if you need some solitude, you get some solitude. If you need some company, you get some company. Now, if you're always taking care of other people, every mom on this call, every dad that's listening to this call, we understand that you are always taking care of other people. You are putting the well-being and the welfare of your children and your family above yourself. I remember being a new mom and not getting a chance to eat, barely getting a chance to go, to the bathroom without the kids standing
Mhm.
outside the door calling for you. I remember all of that. And I remember when my first child was like, oh my goodness, she was 2, 3, 4 months old, and all she did was cry, 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 cry. And we lived on the 7th floor of this apartment building. And I put the baby in the bed because I was exhausted. And she was in there crying. I couldn't do anything about it. I walked out to the balcony and I said, now I wonder if I just jump now.
Mm.
Right? Right?
What a horrible intrusive thought. I
You know what I mean?
understand it.
You know?
Yep. Yep.
Because you're at your wits end, and you've done all that you can do, and you don't see the end of the thing, and you're feeling despair and you're feeling hopeless. Well, obviously I didn't jump because she's a well-adjusted adult now. But it was at that moment where I had the wherewithal to go and pick up the phone to call somebody. And I
Right.
called them and I boo-hooed, just so I'm crying, the baby's crying, everybody's crying. But that person that I called, and I called my mother.
Mm. Isn't it
And
isn't it always mom, right?
it's always mom, or it's always that auntie, or it's
Mhm.
always that sister that you're really
Yep.
close to.
This either the sister or the pseudo sister.
Yeah,
I got a
I mean,
pseudo
yeah,
sister who I call
yeah,
up and I say, "Listen,
yeah,
I need to just be angry for a minute, and I need you to just be my cheerleader, whether
yep,
you agree or not."
yep. And you learn to listen. So I was able to call my mom, and my mom listened, and she listened to me boo-hoo and babble on and blah blah blah. And finally, when I had cried myself out and I'd gotten it all out, she said to me, I'll be over in a few minutes.
Mm,
And she did, and she came and she took care of that crying baby, and she said, you go sleep.
mm,
And that's what I did. We don't always have that level of support. Like then,
right.
I was a military family and we moved away. And when we moved away, I didn't have my mom. I didn't
Mhm.
have anybody. And we moved, I lived up north and then we moved into the south, and it was like a total culture shock to me. And here I was, this northern girl in the southern part of the United States, and I was like, I don't even understand what these people are saying because I don't understand their accents.
Mhm.
And I was like, can I just go home? But I got here and I stayed here. And I
Mhm.
raised my family here, and I have loved my community here in North Carolina.
I think that's a
Um,
really important part right there is just the fact that you can feel deserted
mhm,
and still build a community around yourself if you're very
absolutely.
intentional about what you're doing. It may feel
Absolutely.
like you're alone, but you are not
You're not.
alone.
Look, and no matter where we are, like in that instance, I built a community for my children. I grew up in a huge family, tons of cousins and aunts and uncles and barbecues and hanging out on the weekends, all of that. My kids didn't have that. So what I did is I built a family for them. And
Right.
so they grew up with aunties and uncles, and they grew up with cousins, and they weren't biological, but they were heart connected, right? People that I loved and trusted and grew to know. And so we built a family and we built a community. And so that really matters, that when you know that you're not alone. I think aloneness, not solitude for a moment, but
Mhm.
aloneness, this feeling of having no one, having no hope for the future. It's always this catastrophic thinking that people can move into when they're feeling depressed or anxious or overwhelmed or burned out. That it's really important that there is support there. That's why churches are great. Women's groups are great. Men go golfing or they go hang out with the guys and play basketball or whatever they do. And these things, these social supports are all crucial and vital to our mental and emotional well-being,
Right. Right.
right? You can't live a life of peace if you're alone. But I would say, for those people that do feel alone, you have to give yourself some grace. What
Yeah.
does that mean? You cut yourself a break and you're not so hard on yourself. And you're not thinking that if you didn't do it perfect, if it isn't just right, then you're a failure. There's no such thing as failure. You can't fail. All you're doing is you're this spiritual person, right? Living inside this physical body, you're having a human experience. And part of human experience is that, oh, that didn't go the way I wanted to do. Let me do something different. And I love, and I tell people who are depressed, I love the possibility of a new adventure.
Mm.
I love the possibility that I can tweak one little thing in my life and maybe have a totally different outcome. And I love the possibility that all is not lost, that fear is just an illusion, and that if I'm strong and very courageous and I hold somebody else's hand, that I can get through anything.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I
right?
think one of the fun things about what you just said, and I like to bring fun into it. This can be a very serious conversation, and it is.
Yeah.
And I don't want anybody to think that we're going to take this super lightly. But an element of navigating this space, especially within a community, is to
Mhm.
be able to share different perspectives and different viewpoints on things. And one of the things that I've experienced that I learned from probably social media. So remember that the information age isn't all bad.
No, it's
We
not.
just need to, so this is twofold, actually. I just reminded myself of something else. The first thing is that I saw somebody one time, when things don't go your way, it can be something as simple as your kid knocked over their juice, or you didn't get the job you wanted, or you're not making the money you wanted to in business, or we can keep going from little to huge, right? Somebody said, when something like that happens, before you run down the hall of catastrophe, shout, plot twist, and see what happens. See what happens. If, oh, plot twist, what's going to happen next? It changes the way you think, especially if you can get your body to do it, to
Yeah,
shout it, and
yeah,
to like brace yourself for the next cool adventure and
yeah.
just get yourself into that space. That
Yeah.
doesn't, I'm not saying that we need to belittle some of the crappy things
Mm-mm.
that happen in your life, but rather let's see what we can do to reshape the way we're growing in those
Mhm,
situations of pain.
mhm, mhm,
The second thing that led me to think of is the concept of boundaries, because you had mentioned something about taking care of yourself, self-care, and that can look different for everybody. And you also mentioned, those beautiful moments of solitude. Now, the only way you can get to those spaces is through boundaries, and those boundaries within the construct of a community
mhm,
can be literal lifesavers.
mhm, mhm.
So let's dive into
Absolutely.
that a little bit more about the
Yeah.
communication that's needed, because you are indeed a communications
Mhm,
expert. The
mhm,
communication that's needed in order to set and maintain those boundaries in a
mhm.
way that serves you in a solitary sense, but then
Yeah,
also serves you in an outreach sense.
yeah, yeah. Well, the first thing I think before you even get to the boundaries, you have to know who you are and what your boundaries are, right? You have to learn. I think that there is a strength in authenticity, right? You have to be real. You have to be able to know your strengths and know your weaknesses and know who you are as a person. Once you know that, then you understand the type of boundaries that you need to set. Right? There are boundaries. You have to even have boundaries with your kids. You have to have boundaries with your spouse. As a pastor, I've had to put up boundaries. Oh my goodness. Or my phone would be ringing 24 hours a day.
Mhm.
And so boundaries mean that I love myself enough that I want to participate in your world, but I also want to and need to protect my heart, protect my mind, and protect my need for solitude at some points, right?
Right.
So boundaries are extremely important, but the key to a boundary is that you have to love yourself enough to realize that you need one.
Right. And I just wanted to add to that because the concept, I mean, as anyone who's been in my world for a little while knows, that authenticity is something that I dive really
Mhm,
hard into.
mhm,
And
mhm.
I know from personal experience and my experience with all of my clients that knowing who you are is easier said than done.
It
And so
is.
I'm going to be here to give permission to you not to know who you are and still set boundaries. And you can change those boundaries. And I'm going to be very transparent. Like, I'm pretty sure I know who I am. Like, I've done a lot of work, but I am ever evolving. So even the other day, I was having a very candid conversation with my husband, and he said something to me. And keep in mind, my husband's very loving. Our relationship is very lovely. He
Mhm,
said something to me, but I went, I don't like that.
mhm.
And so, and this is really key. I feel like this is really key. So
Yeah.
I said, you know what? I actually would really like you not to say that again.
Mhm.
And he went, oh, I didn't mean to offend. And I said, I know you didn't. And that's okay. But it's
Yeah.
not being received well for me. And I need you to
Mhm.
not talk about that in the way that you just did. And of course, because I've been able to navigate, I've got a good relationship. He's like, yeah, no problem. I'm not going to do that again. So I want to give you permission to be okay with something or be not okay with something
Right, right.
until you are or you aren't. Like, you're allowed to switch and change.
Absolutely. I love that. I love what you said. You are self-aware enough. You've done the work enough to really know. And when I say know who you are, yes, we are always evolving. We're always changing. Who I am today is not who I was when I was
And
30.
I was gonna say,
Absolutely.
and I've gotten it wrong enough.
Absolutely.
And I
But
think
that's
that's
what I'm saying.
really, really
We
important to
we
got it
fail.
wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, we fail at stuff, but it's not a failure, right?
Yes.
Does
Yes.
that make sense? We fail at stuff, but it's not a failure. And we are not the failure. Something just didn't work. And when we do that, we change, we evolve, we grow. Absolutely. But you know who you are at any given moment. I could tell you who I am today as compared to who I was 30 years ago. And I'm
So
different today because of the things that I've lived through and the the emotional disturbances that I've had to work through in my life. So yeah, I think that our boundaries really have to do with the fact of knowing who we are at any given moment. Not that we will be that same person forever. And yes, we give people permission not to know who they are, but when you don't know who you are, it's like you don't have a real you don't know what a boundary is because boundaries are in relation to who you are. Right. Right. So that idea that you're able to have that conversation with your husband is because you know who you are. Having worked in a women's shelter for domestic violence, I met women every day who were unable to have those communications, that type of communications with their spouse because they themselves didn't know who they are. They knew who he told her she was.
right.
They knew that she was, you're dumb. Okay, I got the brains here, so don't even talk. Don't tell me what you're going to do. Get in there, make my dinner, take care of my kids. I mean, and all of these cliches and stereotypes. And you're like, is that for real? Yeah, I'm here to tell you that's still for real today. And because she didn't know who she was, that's where she wound up in situations where she put up with that for years. But when enough was enough and there was something on the inside of her or her children were at risk, it was like, I can't do this anymore. And
Yep.
then that's when they get the courage and the ability to communicate. I don't like that.
And there's the boundary that starts
Yep.
with communication. And so
Communication.
it's both the boundary, and then it's also, I think, what you did yourself when you needed help. Hey,
Yeah.
I need help. Communication.
And people have to learn that. That is not something, okay, babies cry and they don't care who you are. There's like, I need something right now. But as we socialize our children, we cause them to lose that, right? Um, I don't have time right now.
Mm,
Stop yelling. Stop calling me. However, all the things that we say to kids and we don't really think about the long-term effect of what we're saying. But children quickly learn. They go to school. There's only certain times that you can have a need. They go to wherever they go to, all the social constructs in our society. You have to behave a certain way. And so sometimes if they can lose the ability to say and to communicate that I have needs and that they
Mhm.
need to be attended to, right?
Absolutely.
And so it's really important, I think,
We
that
need to relearn that.
we
We
need to
need to
relearn that.
relearn that and embrace the idea that communicating is an integral part of being human. We do it
It
when we
is.
are born.
And if you can't communicate your needs, I'm not talking about just your wants and your desires. I'm talking about your needs on a basic level. I need some care right now. I need a hug right now. I need some love right now. I need somebody to sympathize with me right now. I need to be heard right now. If we can't communicate those things for fear
Mm,
of being ridiculed or rejected or made to be humiliated, if we can't communicate what we need when we need it, then we do have this dysfunctional existence that we're living,
right. Yeah.
you know.
And then we go full circle. Then we
Yeah,
go full circle to where we
absolutely.
started. I love that, and I know that that was a very profound, kind of concept in and of itself, but I wanna invite you, Brenda, to share any sort of remaining thoughts that you have that, these things that you need to tell the world that we may not have touched on yet.
Yeah,
So I if
yeah.
you have any final thoughts, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, one of the things that I've spent a lot of time really thinking about, along with my business. The reason I became a coach is because I have pastored people and taught women for so many years to have self esteem, to love themselves, to love who God created them to be, to walk in their unique divineness. I see things from a faith perspective. And one of the things that really is near and dear to my heart is this idea of being resilient. When we have emotional disturbances, sometimes we don't have enough resilience in us, but resilience can be built. How do we build resilience so that we can overcome these? And I'm not talking clinical mental illness. That needs a therapist, that needs a doctor, sometimes that needs medication, and that needs management plans. But I'm talking about those emotional disturbances where life is uncomfortable for us on the inside. And I want to help people to really just build their resilience so that they can have this amazing, beautiful, prosperous, abundant, and happy life that I believe that we were created to enjoy. And part of the way that I do that is really, like I said, I step into those spaces where people have gaps in their lives, where they are perhaps not feeling enough. You are enough. How do I know that you're enough? Because I know the creator and I know who created you and I know that he made you in his image. And I don't think God was schizophrenic at all. I don't think God was depressed at all. I don't think God was even anxious at all. I think that he had a perfect plan for you. And so I just want to step into those spaces to help people build resilience. And part of building resilience means that you get to love yourself enough, or if you can't even say that I love myself, you get to say at least I can take care of myself enough so that I can, get up the next day and try something new, have a new adventure, see the new possibilities. And that involves quite a few things. It involves having a community of people that love you, number one. It involves making a decision that when I have a need, I'm going to tell somebody, right?
Yes.
If you can't tell your mom, if you can't talk to your sisters, or there's somebody in this world that cares what you're going through. If you don't believe in God as Father, if you don't believe in, Jesus as a Savior and Redeemer, that's okay. There's somebody that you can talk to. Now, I will tell you this, God is a great spiritual heavenly Father, because you can tell him anything. And you don't have to worry about being rejected, and you don't have to worry about him not hearing you or him not caring, because he does care for you. I want to say that to you. But then find somebody and you call them up, or you knock on their door, and you say to them, and without shame, without fear, I'm falling apart here and I need some help. And it's okay with that. I needed help, at one time. I was pastoring a church. I had started a business. I was running the women's shelter, and I was taking care of my mom in my home, who was on hospice at that time. My mother was funny. She was on hospice for 2 years. She wasn't quite ready to go. And all of this was going on in my life, and God created me for that. I was able to handle that and function with that. But then I tell you, a devastating thing happened, and my husband decided that he was going to leave,
Mm.
and that he wanted a different life. And he went off, and I believe he was with some young girl that he used to know. Blah 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 blah. My world could have come crashing down. But I called on people.
Yes.
30 days later, my mother passed away. My church family was grieving the
Mm.
the the loss of my mother, grieving the loss of my husband and his presence in their life, and I felt so alone. It was humiliating, it was embarrassing.
Mhm.
Here I am loving God, preaching the gospel, being an example for women, telling, truth, encouraging women and lifting them up. And here my life was in shambles. Could have been. But what I
Mhm.
did, and this was because of the resilience muscle that I had already built up. It's an ongoing process, because self-care builds your resilience. The ability to know that I fall down, but I get up. The ability to know that, what didn't work out today can work out tomorrow. The ability to know that all things are working together for my good. Okay, because, whether you have faith or not, I do. God loves me, right? So all
Mhm.
things are going to work together for my good. Because my resilience muscle memory was already built up, my life didn't fall apart.
Right.
And I had enough reserve in me to take care of my mom in the way that she deserved, to take care of my brother, my sister, to take care of my church family, to take care of even myself, when I could have felt rejected, humiliated, so destroyed that it shut me down and shut my mouth. I took some time to grieve the loss of my mom, and the loss of my marriage, and the loss of my joy for a moment, my happiness for a moment, and I allowed myself to feel the uncomfortableness. And I slept a lot, and I ate ice cream a lot, and and I watched movies on Netflix, and then I found myself just coming back up. I met with my girls, I met with my crew, we talked a lot. There were other ministers that understood that whole spiritual dynamic, and we talked a lot. So I talked to people, and
Right.
I indulged myself, and I took care of myself. So that's what I want to say to people. If I could survive it, you can survive it,
Beautiful.
right?
I love that.
And yeah, I'm no different than you. I'm just a person that's trying to do my best in the world, trying to fulfill my divine purpose on this planet. And things happen. And yeah, I fall down, but I get up again. And I
That's
want you to get up again.
actually what's really funny about this conversation is that literally yesterday, my 5-year-old told me one time, yesterday, he says, you know, Mom, I have fallen down like 100 times. And I
Yeah.
said, oh yeah? And how many times did you get back up? He goes, 101. I'm like, yes.
Oh, yes. I
Yes.
love it. I
Right.
love it.
It was
Right?
so beautiful.
Isn't it
I
amazing?
loved it.
Even see, this is what I'm saying. Children already have the concept.
Mm.
We teach it out of them, right? And we need to come back and we need to find that again, that yeah, we fall down, but you get back up again. And if you can't get
Absolutely.
back up, reach out for somebody that can get you up.
And that was the final thought here, is just the idea that, hey, guess what? You've got a community. If you didn't think you had one before, you've got one now. And that's the whole purpose of why we're here, why we're talking. So please don't forget to comment. Keep the conversation going. That's
Yeah.
why we're here. Make sure
Yeah.
you like, subscribe, and share with your friends. We're going to be here talking about this stuff for a good long time. We're not
Yeah.
going anywhere, people. But we will
Absolutely.
chat with you very soon. See you later.
Thank you, Shauna.